Good evening, everybody. I'm very impressed and somewhat awed by the turnout, fabulous turnout. I take very little credit for that, but certainly Andrew should and the other panel members. Gordon Price, are you in the room? Yes, he is. Thanks for the slide. Hope that's okay. I did try and call you earlier, just to make sure I got the credits out of the way there. That's a Pricean moment, right? I'm going to take very little of your time in standing up here because I want to both hear from our distinguished fellow panelists, but more importantly, hear from all of you. And I see an enormous amount of brain power and knowledge and thoughtful, considering thinking in this room collected here tonight. So I'm hoping that with a fairly short presentation and with the cooperation of my fellow panel members, we can quickly move to the interactive part of the evening, where I think we're going to get a very lot of good ideas and an interesting dialogue going. I just wanted to start with this picture, and it is a fabulous photograph, and I couldn't possibly have bested it, so thank you for that, Gordon. I think this picture tells 1,000 words, does speak 1,000 words about Vancouver's peculiar nature of its public life. That so much of that happens at the edge, at the waterfront, unlike so many other cities, both in North America and even more obviously in the older world of Europe and so on. This, of course, is a fireworks evening on one of those 4 nights when we get something in the order of 250,000 people on each one of those 4 nighs to come out to downtown Vancouver, to line the edges of the city, turn their backs to the city, look out to the water, wait for the sun to set, do what they're going to do, and then watch the fireworks and then go home. I mean, it is an interesting thing, and I speculate in Dream City about what that might mean in terms of a sociological phenomenon, as opposed to the more centripetal, centric formulation of public gatherings that we're more typically familiar with in places like Paris or London or Barcelona, etc. But this really is sort of the ultimate Vancouver public gathering, and it happens at the edge, and it happens in a linear way. And I think that's a really important part of beginning to kind of disaggregate or dig under the skin of what is Vancouver's sense of place, what is its unique public life all about. It's not, and historically hasn't been, about a place at the center. So much of our public life is focused on the edge, and in fact, if you follow the money, so to speak, where the public investment of both public and private funding has been largely at the waterfront edge to create or recreate a fabulous public realm at the waterfront. However, there is a kind of a darker side of that, which is the corollary, which is that we've spent far less effort and much less money, historically, on creating the more traditional centripetal public spaces in the center of the city. Next slide, please. I just threw this in. Some of you will be familiar with the spaces on the right. That's a rather peculiar public space that is now in fact landlocked with the recent development of Cole Harbour's waterfront. But I think it kind of tells the story. It's about spaces that look out from the city, that actually don't engage with the city, but in fact are oriented towards the distant view, quite literally, in the case of the space on the right. And perhaps the most famous and the most well-known and perhaps the most cherished of our public spaces is the one on the left, which is Stanley Park's seawall, and I like to describe that as a public square that is 3 meters wide by 10 kilometers long. And really, if you think about it, that is what it is. It's a great social condenser, and on a good sunny day, you can hear, dozens of languages as you move along that edge. And so that kind of is something peculiar about that, and it's something rather unique. It's not very common to find that kind of a active edge in large urban cities around the world. And so Vancouver's kind of followed its own drum on this one, and we've done something really interesting with that. And certainly, Stanley Park is almost a shorthand for, being seen and to go out in Vancouver. Everyone understands that role. So it really is a centrifugal versus a centripetal focus of public space, in my analysis, in any event. And I think that, these images certainly show you a couple of examples of that. And so the other side of that is what has happened at the center, and unfortunately, in my opinion, not very much. Next, please. However, when I was researching Dream City, I came across this wonderful slide from about 1912 on the top left-hand corner here, called Courthouse and Vancouver Hotel, Vancouver, BC. And what that is, of course, is the space to the north of what is now the Vancouver Art Gallery, and which was formerly the forecourt or public square in front of the main entrance to the courthouse of this province of British Columbia. And the image you're seeing is really of the square at the height of its use and engagement as the center of public life in the city of Vancouver in around 1912. I believe the Governor General was visiting from wherever he came, Ottawa or London at that time. And this was a formal event, and you can see all kinds of people in uniform and dressed up and standing in their cars, and bunting and swags and flags on the buildings around it. And of course the courthouse is all set up with the dais and the flags and so on. There's a sense of celebratory spectacle here, of coming together, of a kind of a shared understanding of the kind of semiotics of that space, that this is about the center of Vancouver. This is public life writ large in the city. Unfortunately, that was the high point. It kind of went downhill after that. And as we know, when we look at the slide on the right, the bottom, that same space today, I would describe it as something of an orphaned space. People, of course, still use it, but it's certainly fallen on harder times and has nowhere near the same sense of energy and of importance and perhaps of identity in the average Vancouverite's mental map of his or her city. In fact, I'll bet you very few people in this room know what that space is legally and technically called today. Well, I'll tell you, in about 1967, in celebration of this country's centennial, the city fathers of the time, and it was mostly men, decided to rename it Centennial Square. Well, I don't know anybody in Vancouver amongst my circle who calls it Centennial Square. I don't think anybody really knows it that name. But the point is that the square has kind of been divorced from the surrounding city, both by the wide streets with the heavy traffic on three sides, by the nature of the buildings on the surrounding three sides, and perhaps most egregiously, of course, in the late 70s, early 80s, with the redevelopment of the courthouse into the Vancouver Art Gallery and the relocation of the courthouse another block further south, with the permanent closure of what used to be the front door of that building. And so now there's really no reason to go into that space. It's no longer the forecourt, the front door to a public building which serves the entire community. And so the square is kind of atrophied over time, and it also hasn't been helped by the kind of plunking down of various things over time, like the statues and the fountain there, and various other paraphernalia and landscaping and so on that has been done, you know, over time and aggregated and basically filled up the space. And so I do think that there's a case to be made, and I'm not suggesting that this is the only location, for this site to be reconsidered and to kind of dig back into its history and perhaps re-engaged with in the course of this Where is the Square Ideas competition. I think certainly it's a candidate site that both has the history and the memory of that and is there. You know, it answers the question about, well, where can we fit it? So it certainly is worth reconsidering. But I would argue this, that if someone's going to take this space on, it's not the space defined by the streets, it's the space defined by the buildings that has to be studied. If you only study the space defined by the streets, you're not going to solve the problem and create a really dynamic, integrated square with the city. It has to go to the edges.